Hello and welcome in Functional Fiction series, a place where I try to look at tech from movies and games a bit too seriously and see how they compare to current technology, how painful would it be to deliver something like shown in the movie in real life. And for today we have Avatar. Avatar, which I think the word takes place in 2155-56. Humanity in the future definitely will have some cool tech.
It is 4 minutes. There's nobody be there today. I'm very glad of my report. I was going to tell us.
Okay, so beginning of the movie, and we already have very interesting take on the technology. So we are in the cockpit of ship and we see that there is plenty of screens. There are plenty of HUD displays. Very cool thing about this particular depiction is that it's not super overcrowded. I mean, it makes sense that when you are flying, you want to be able to keep track of two different things. You want to keep track of the data, obviously, but then you want to keep track of whatever is happening outside. This is why some of the cars get HUD as well, because it's, much safer to look at the screen which is on the window itself. We see that there are some frames, so the frames can provide us with some kind of framework to have this kind of imaginary screen. I think they are only for the view only, because we see that there is additional computer on the actual panel, on the actual dashboard. So what I'm assuming is that the guys here have, the actual physical screen as secondary option. They have the HUDs as a displays only. They are not really to be interacted with. And then they might interact with some kind of buttons that you can see here. Those
Approach. Crossing a marker.
Okay, and then definitely can take the frame out of the view so they have unobscured view. But looking at the software itself, it's not super strange, I think. You have some kind of map which is rendered, and you can see that that's the most dynamic element on the screen, which I think maps the terrain. As they are flying, it makes sense that it will move in the same speed as the ship flies. So this is totally fine. Every other element has some kind of data, they are big screens, they have plenty of space. So from a perspective of building the solution for those kind of pilots, for people who need to have a lot of information, but they need to be able to look at those information very quickly and understand them at a glance, it's very well designed screen interfaces. One thing I would be worried about is whether or not we can change contrasts, because for example here, you can see that in some places the bluish mark isn't really providing the best contrast, and you cannot really read out the letters when it comes to, for example, the right screen, which is hidden. I would be also worried about the overflowing. So when we would design something like this, think about including a feature to change the color. That's for sure. Change the color or contrast, because this kind of bluish is not necessarily the best color for everyone. And having ability to change it might be an amazing feature. We have a screen which is behind the next one, whether we can see it. If yes, then it would be a very problematic thing, because you would have multiple different layers of text overlapping on each other and you wouldn't be able to look at either of them. So I hope that the scenario here is that when you take a panel behind another panel, one of the screens simply disappears or just hides. Very strong start, and actually the panels here, the buttons, and approach to providing good enough value information and good enough space to have those information layered, especially that we have plenty of space, we have plenty of screens, is amazing. So Avatar, really good start.
It's nothing like an old school safety brief to put your mind at ease.
The pilot. We're gonna spend a lot of time up here. Hey, how you doing? Norm, Avatar driver.
Here we are. So as we can see, pattern for humanity, design yeah, 2155 or 6 is definitely a lot of transparent screens, and we probably will be seeing many of them. Here we can see some laboratory tests or some laboratory personnel working on a bluish screen. We can see monocolor element, which may or may not be the most preferable way. I have a feeling that the color, the one color used here, is only for the video purposes, because if we were about to look at this kind of interconnected data, from human perspective, it would be really hard to understand what are the connections between all of the nodes. So it would be beneficial to include some kind of element, some kind of coloristics to them, so that you can differentiate each different nodes, each different proteins. I guess they are working on proteins, knowing avatar case. Identifying it using coloristics would be a definitely preferable way.
Here's the link right here. This is where we're connecting to the app.
Yeah, so we can see that the pattern also is not necessarily too far off from what we have right now. They definitely have multiple windows which, overlay on top of the screen, and that the windows can be managed, can be dragged throughout the screen. I think they have some kind of code terminal, which is, okay-ish in this case. And there might be working on some code, there might be working on some kind of script. So in this regard, this looks promising, this looks quite realistic. The problem I'm starting to having with those kind of transparent screens is the privacy. Because first of all, when you look at the screen from the front, you want to look at different elements. When you have a transparent screen, what is happening is the same thing as with the ship. The contrast start to be a bit of an issue in some cases. If, for example, somewhere in the lab, someone is turning on very bright lights, if they are having any kind of experiments, some flashing, and so on, it would be really hard to keep track of what's happening in the actual window. And on the other hand, people from the outside can kind of get a grasp on what you're working at, even as we are doing it right now. Considering that this is super secret facility, or this is like a super secret program, this is not what you're looking for. This is not what you're looking for, because then assuming that every person here has different restrictions in terms of data availability, this kind of thing potentially created security breaches.
The proprioceptive sensing work really well.
Yeah, it's got great muscle tone. It'll take a few hours to get them to can.
Okay, interesting. We definitely see that this panel here has the same visual layer as every other screen. So we definitely can differentiate this kind of left navigation bar. It's not transparent, as you can see here.
But you guys can take them out tomorrow. There's yours.
I have no idea why this guy had to touch it. Definitely we saw a lot of animations there going on, which, as for their presentation in real life, because I'm assuming that this is a representation of some activity going within this tank, showing this in real life, super amazing, very, very good. We saw some of the highlights, but this is more on the highlights representing the tank, representing the avatar itself. This is kind of expected in this case. I have no idea why this guy have touched the screen when they entered and when they left, because they just changed the screen and we definitely saw some kind of table or list of events, what I'm expecting. But apart from that, he didn't do anything. There was no particular action he had to confirm. There was no particular event that was happening. He just changed the screen.
It's insanely expensive.
Is this right? I just...
From this perspective, you can clearly see what I'm talking about in terms of having semi-transparent screen, having all of the background being visible as well doesn't help you in terms of the coloristics. Here we see that they actually started to coloring nodes. We see that it's not total monocolor. So wow, I mean, I'm super impressed that they thought about this. We see that we have a lot of the tabs. We see that there is some kind of navigation bar on the left. But here the main screen we see, I usually have a problem with this, doing random stuff at you. And here definitely we saw some kind of random activities. However, in this case, I think it's not that unexpected. When you try to work with AI, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and so on, with our current technology we have, there are agents, and agents are capable of performing specific tasks. Assuming that this is in the future, that people wouldn't do analysis on their own manually. This kind of thing might represent that someone tasked an agent to analyze certain pieces of DNA, I suppose. And what we can see here within the window as a preview, I suppose, is a preview of a code, of a instructions or script being handled. And on the right side, we can see that the script, for example, tries to match different elements. So what we have here might be an AI trying to follow instructions. We as humans have additional layer of control because we can see what it is doing. And we can see on each piece of the code of the, I think, DNA, this script is working on. And where, for example, he is focusing on right now, whether it's the script stacked, whether the script starts to looping itself. So in this case, this makes sense.
Yeah, we gotta get in the habit of documenting everything, what we see, what we feel. It's all part of the science.
Good science, good observation.
Plus, it'll help keep you sane for the next 6 years.
Again, I think there might be some kind of similarity between the last screen. So we have a preview of a model with real-time data flow. In this case, we see that not necessarily all the elements are floating randomly, but what is floating are the elements within the model, which might indicate simply that, hey, some kind of general energy flow is going through, which might be of interest to those guys behind the desks. We see that you can easily hide and expand details, which is, wow, mind-blowing, because for this kind of elements, there probably is plenty of multiple different layers of information you might want to get, and we are collecting, right? So we might be collecting elements about the avatar, about the human. We might be collecting some kind of errors. You wouldn't want this to be thrown at you at once. You would want this to be easily accessible, but not necessarily shown at you at once. So we had there like a very big model, and the lady came, opened something, clicked something, and got an expanded view. Also, there are some kind of alerts or notifications. You know, you have something pinging out, but only for a brief moment, which might be indication of, you know, certain metrics being too high, certain metrics being on a dangerous level. But this was more of an indication for a human, not necessarily random action.
Damn cigarette. Guys, what's wrong with this picture? Thank you.
Grace Augustine is a legend. She's the head of the Avatar program. She wrote the book. I mean, literally wrote the book on Pandora Bob.
Well, this is planets better than people.
Here she is, Cinderella back from the ball. Grace, I'd like to meet Norm Solomon and Jake Sully.
Same thing as previously. I think all of those screens we saw here are some kind of visualizations of a scanner of specific tools that have real-time data feed. In data heavy and especially like 3D heavy files and 3D heavy software, you wouldn't want to use a lot of animations because they require a lot of computing power to handle it well. Because from the performance perspective, they are very hard to tackle. What do we have here? This kind of war room table, I mean, this is next level thing. You have projectors going through multiple different angles. First established thing here is that they thought about not having random holograms appearing everywhere without, not knowing where the hell it will appear, but you have a special design table with actual controls. There are some kind of joysticks, there are some kind of controllers, which, having some kind of circle joystick with those kind of interactions. We are assuming that this kind of map can, move only in a couple of different directions, and you might want to zoom in, you might want to very well thought think, because in such kind of setting you wouldn't want everyone, to be shaking hands and then randomly clicking on something on the holographic screen, but you want one person to be of control and then having everyone else look at it from different angles. Another very interesting thing, a swivel chair. One thing for sure, we definitely can see the same pattern as for the other screens. When you can see there is a top bar with cards, there is a sidebar with some kind of icons to change according to whatever you're looking for. With this kind of setting, what we are assuming is they are operators and they need to keep track of multiple different areas at once. Having this kind of field of view allows you to do it and understand the spatial data much, much better. And having this kind of thing, spherical thing per one person, rather than having it on a table, allows you to again pinpoint it and have specific field of view for one operator only. We also see nice visualization of the topography, and there are some ships with floating data containers, probably relevant to this specific ship. What I'm not sure about is that the lady clicked something on the right and then the panel appeared on the left. What this means is that most likely she has a duplicated screen, which would be extremely stupid. Because if you have a field of view like this, you want to have the field of view and being unique on every kind of angle. Especially that you have some kind of compass on the very top, which indicates that there should be a field of view dedicated to given field of view, especially that the topography seems to indicate so. Unless she clicked element on the right side and then she wanted to highlight linked ships. In this case, this might be a very cool thing to do. However, there is no strict connection to it. So what we would need to do in terms of actually making this a realistic thing usable by normal human beings is when you try to show and establish a connection from one element on the map to another element on the map, you would need to indicate it with some kind of a line that they are actually connected, so that you know that there is some kind of relationship between them. If I were a pilot in the future, I would like to be an operator on this kind of swivel chair because it's super cool. And also there is some kind of joystick. One more thing, and we see it from the very first scene, overlapping of the screens. We saw that she were able to turn around, but the turning wasn't only the chair, it was like two sectors of the screen, which probably indicates that the whole system is set strictly to having, for example, 180 degrees of view. And when you try to turn around, you're sticking to 180 field of view and you're grabbing it with yourself. So you are actually always, and when you try to look a different angle, then you'll see the same angle but just from a different perspective, which might be useful for operator like this.
You know, I used to think it was benign neglect, but now I see that you're intentionally screwing me.
So my last theory maybe, but we can see that the operator, we see that the operator clicked something on the left and then randomly turn around to the other side. It was 100% only made to make it look cool.
Grace, you know, I enjoy our little talks.
Oops.
Jarhead clan. And it worked.
Hey, I'm right to the family.
Also, a very cool thing about the whole table is that the yellow pattern, the yellow lines, indicate where the screen will be projected, so where is the dangerous area. You have similar kind of things in VR tech right now, where you can, have a augmented reality in terms of showing you when in the space something will be shown.
I have to learn to be one of them.
That's called taking an initiative, son. I wish I had 10 more like you.
Look, Sully, just find out what the blue monkeys want. You know, I mean, we tried to give them medicine, education, roads, but no, they like money.
Yeah, there's some kind of data flowing around there, and I'm not really fan of this in this context. However, this might be a case that, you have many different operators, and this table might be the kind of source of all of them at once. So everyone making changes, the changes will appear here, and the data appearing are just an indication that someone uploads new data. Might be a case. I think better way would be to simply have some kind of indication around it, because you're not able to make sense of this data anyway when they are shown in this regard. But what we like about this design of the table is also you have plenty of markers, and the markers are good thing to have when you're working on spatial data, when you're working on tools which enable you to navigate, because you are able to share according to specific location, to specific coordinate, where something is placed, where you want anyone else to get their attention to.
And that wouldn't bother me. It's just that they're, can somebody just... Sector 12.
As I mentioned, the joystick, the panel is kind of unique to this kind of table, so you would probably have to go through very steep learning curve to do it efficiently. But here our main manager of the mission, main manager of the company tried to do it. We saw that he's not really effective, and he gave it away to someone else who is more used to it.
Hey, go, stop. Rick, stop. That's Jesus. Their damn village.
A lot of data still that can be kept. You see that there is some kind of gear surveying element. You have an indication of the sector. So assuming we're working on the mapping data and LiDAR data, this is great to understand where we are while having enough details to understand the details, but also knowing where we are in the grand scale of things.
The tree of souls. I did try it on Munon. It's their most sacred place. Flux vortex and these false color images.
So we have a close-up to our screen, and as we saw recently, there are multiple windows, plenty of canvas, that's for sure. We have the same pattern as we saw previously, top bar with tabs and then some kind of cards on the left menu bar, which is great because this also shows us that the design that is here, all the components, work for multiple different resolutions. They work for this kind of big screen where you have 36, 40 inches maybe. Kind of pattern also works on tablets as we saw previously. Someone thought about this as well. We see it on the left side. You have those 4 colored blocks. They are wrapped in some kind of a frame. And this frame has multiple different elements, which might stand for having multiple different applications or modules, for example, available to the user. This kind of pattern indicates us that there is probably plenty of those options, but because there are so plenty of those options, you might want to hide or collapse all of those which are not used that frequently. Those 4 opened ones might be either the most recently used, might be the most popular, or there might be customizable, so that each operator has its own modules according to their needs, according to their work pattern. In the left corner, there is an indication of an account. First of all, the information about the account and the person logged in is very, very large. Here we have plenty of real estate on the screen, so it's not really a big issue. Where this gets me, however, is the fact that at this point in the film, the team is kind of rebelling against the main company. From an IT security standpoint, you would get disconnected from an intranet immediately when someone realizes that you are trying to rebel against them. Assuming that you're connected, you wouldn't have access to they wouldn't have access to anything. They wouldn't probably be able to log in or open the PC because they would be just simply disconnected like this. There is a case that the ship itself have some kind of data related to backup, for example. It's possible. However, most likely this would just never happen. We have a lot of ways to track who is working on which kind of screen, on which kind of account at the current moment. And in software development, there is plenty of ways to block specific people only from allowing either the whole applications, allowing the whole systems, disallowing them to trigger specific features. So when something like this would happen, IT guy would get a call, hey, disable those accounts. He'll just disable them most likely, and the whole thing would never happen. Enough of avatar tech, let's rate it. Let's start with feasibility. So as for the tech shown there, many of those cases would be quite possible to deliver now. The patterns within the UI are also very well taught. There were no specific element which just screamed at you, hey, it's like super sci-fi. I think avatar tech deserves 9 in terms of feasibility. Usefulness. How would those technologies improve the life of current people? I think having such big HUDs would definitely help people when you're piloting any kind of vehicle. I think those kind of HUDs would be very nice. In any kind of lab settings, in any kind of like office setting and privacy setting, you definitely don't want to have transparency screens, that's for sure. Definitely it's impactful. I wouldn't say it would change the life of everyone around the world. I think it would still be a niche use, so let's give it a 7. Intuitiveness, how easy all of the tech was to use. And to be honest, I have to say that the intuitiveness was super high. Even though our main manager just approached it and was able to control it some way, indicates that it's quite intuitive. I think it requires some onboarding still, but all of this was user-friendly. All of the tools, either tablets, on computers and so on, they followed the same design pattern. They were quite clear. They were not far off from whatever we have right now. So for intuitiveness, I would say in total 8 is a good score for Avatar. Okay, and the wow factor. How cool was all of this we saw? Definitely when you think about this from a perspective of having all of the tech being the same, that adds to the coolness. It adds to the coolness a lot of different new animations and graphics going on. So that's definitely cool. The tables and swivel chairs, operators' rooms were just extremely cool from my perspective. That just straight up. What I think is still the biggest argument is that they had a visual data representations, because without the visual data representations it would be less exciting. So as for wow factor, I think it's 9. Build pain. Assuming that you'd approach someone, some company that builds software right now, and you want the same experience as you have in Pandora, would it be extremely painful to build? I don't think so. I think that especially the software bits were quite easy to handle in terms of they are not that far off from what we have right now in terms of the technology, in terms of components. You might be able to recreate the same interface even today. I'm a bit worried in terms of, the IoT aspect of it. I am not that sure how well it might work in terms of the current state of the industry. I'm knowing from an experience, when you have juggling of multiple different areas of expertise, that's definitely a bit problematic. So I would give it a 7 again, mostly because of the IoT element necessary to do it, and also the intranet thing, the communication and very data heavy loads would require you to think and have multiple different cases. However, you would be able to do it with current skills, at least to some degree. Okay, and the cost. You have one unified pattern, which are capable of serving multiple devices. You have very unified flows. This is a matter of having future people, future companies with access to more resources from the space. Definitely in a reach of a normal company. The softwares there would be probably even doable currently for the enterprises. Yeah, so apart from the fact that a lot of those screens were transparent, which added to the coolness, I think that normal company, like a big enterprise, but yet still, would be capable of creating similar experience. So as for cost, I think this deserves a 5. We rated Iron Man 1 as 5 again, and there was like very heavy AI going on. Here we have a lot of data flow that we need to handle. Whole thing is definitely in a reach of a normal enterprise. And our sum for Avatar of our YOLO score is... And here is the full ranking for now. Thank you for watching and see you next time.